Welcome. Can you hear me? There you go. Welcome to Wright State University. Appreciate you guys taking your valuable time to come out and listen to Daniel. I've been with Daniel since about noon, and I've heard him talk all day, and I don't know where he gets all that energy, but very energetic, okay? Almost as energetic as our president, David Hopkins. It's been a pleasure to work with Dave for the last 10, 11 years, Dave. In fact, Dave and I grew up about 15 minutes apart. He grew up in Elyria, Ohio. I grew up in Lorain, Ohio. So I never thought I'd be here, and Dave probably as well, but we're here, and we're trying to make the best out of it, okay? But we need your help, okay? We have a huge endeavor going on in Dayton, the Welcome Dayton Plan, okay? It's different than the rest of the country. Okay? We are welcoming people here. We are trying to make their lives better. We are trying to transform ideology around this area. But and again, we need everybody's help here. But without further ado, Dr. David Hopkins.
Well, thank you very much, Tony, and I can't say enough about the words Tony just said and how important it is to Wright State University that we embrace everyone. And so Tony's doing a lot of good work, and he's very humble about the things he does personally, but what he's doing at Wright State University in the community is very important work. As I look at a lot of you out there are doing some important work in our future. I want to welcome you to our presidential lecture series. It's been a series that I always look forward to, and we have such amazing opportunity to pick the brains of people who are thinking about the future and the world. And today, we're so pleased to have Daniel Hernandez with us, and I want to say that Daniel braved the weather last night. He flew in during all that turbulent weather last night, and today he has really taken time, and it's so admirable when people come in and they spend time talking to our students, and he's done it endlessly, I think all day long with his energy, but that means a lot to us, and so we're really, really pleased to have him. I know he's been thrust into the national spotlight. He was a little over a year ago, and I'll talk about that, but I think Daniel's going to be able to share some insights with us and lessons learned that I think are very important for not just our students, but everyone in this audience tonight to listen and really embrace what he's going to talk about. But as you know, and maybe you don't know, Daniel was thrust into the national spotlight. And I know he's going to talk about this, but much more than this. On January 8, 2011, when a gunman opened fire outside Tucson, Arizona, a grocery store, killing 6 and wounding 13 others, including Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Daniel was one of several heroes to emerge on that tragic day. An intern in Representative Giffords' office for only 5 days, Daniel was the first person to come to Gabby's aid as she lay bleeding from a gunshot wound to the head. Had it not been for Daniel's medical training, quick thinking, and bravery, Gabby, might not be alive today. Daniel pulled his boss into his lap and held her up so she wouldn't choke on her own blood. At one point, he even used his hand to help curtail her bleeding. Though Daniel was quick to dismiss his hero status, we all know that Daniel helped save a life that day. At a memorial service for the victims 4 days later, President Obama said, "Daniel, I'm sorry. You may deny it, but we have decided you are a hero because you ran through the chaos to minister to your boss and tended to her wounds and helped keep her alive." A student at the University of Arizona studying political science and soon to be a graduate, as I heard him say a few minutes ago, Daniel is dedicated to student advocacy and political activism. He has served on the Arizona Students Association Board of Directors, where he advocated for affordable, something very dear to our heart at Wright State, for affordable and accessible higher education for all Arizonans. Daniel began his political activism in 2007 when he worked on Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. He then joined Gabrielle Giffords' congressional re-election campaign in 2008. Daniels also served on the City of Tucson Commission on Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Wright State welcome to Daniel Hernandez.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to start off by saying it's beautiful here. I've really enjoyed my time here in Dayton, and I think it's actually not called Dayton because we're right outside, but I've loved it. You guys have these green things in the grass and tree. It's been fantastic. So I really want to say I'm really grateful and honored to have been invited to join you tonight here at Wright State University. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk a little bit about my story and why I've wanted to help people, what my motivation has been, kind of what's driven me up until today, a little bit about January the 8th. Then I'm going to wrap it up by talking about some of the lessons that I learned, and I hope I'll be able to share with you all tonight, and hopefully you'll take something away from my talk. So I think for me, it really starts back when I was 5 years old. When people try and think of a defining moment in their lives, I think it's a little harder for them. But for me, it's really easy. When I was 5 years old, I was sitting on the edge of my bed with my sisters, and they were playing around me, so I actually fell backwards, ended up hitting my head up against a chest, and ended up opening up my skull. Being 5 years old and having blood come out and hearing my mother say, we're going to take you to the hospital, set off a set of alarms in my head. I'd only ever gone to visit people in the hospital who were either dead or dying. So for me, when my mother says, we're taking you to the hospital, it was something that was terrifying. It was something that I was petrified, but we get into a taxi because at that point my mother was a single mom, staying-at-home mom and didn't have a car. So we get in a taxi and I have a towel wrapped around my head like a turban and I'm bleeding. And every time I see my blood, it freaks me out even more. And the closer we get to the hospital, the more afraid I become. When I get to the hospital, though, I was very fortunate that we had a nurse and a doctor who were able to see me freaking out and come up to me and say, everything's going to be okay. The nurse took me in her arms, did a quick check of my wound and said, everything's going to be fine. We just need to run some tests and I'm going to make sure that I take care of you. So she kind of calmed me down in the way that nurses are able to. And after she looked at the back of my head and put in a few stitches, I needed to wait for some results from CAT scans and from an MRI. So the doctor actually said, have you ever been in a hospital before? And I said, no, I've only ever been here to see people who are dying. And he said, well, let me show you what I do for a living. I help people. I spend all day trying to help people who are sick or injured. So he let me shadow him in the ER because he was an ER doctor for the first couple of hours while we were waiting for the results. So I get a chance to go and he says, is it okay if my assistant travels with me today and sees what I'm doing with you? And most of the patients said yes. So I got to shadow him, and it was at that moment that I decided I wanted to help people. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to make sure that for the rest of my life, I did the same thing that they had done for me, which was help me feel better both physically and emotionally. He actually gave me $5 because he said, when I got the stitches in, I didn't cry, and it was the first time he'd had someone who hadn't cried when he'd put in stitches. So it was a really great experience. So growing up, I had this foundation. I had this desire to want to help people. Also, only being 5 and only ever having seen people who helped others be doctors and nurses, I had the very misguided thought that the only way to help people was to be a doctor or a nurse. So as I started going through school, I had the mindset of, I will be a physician, I'm going to be a doctor someday. I get to high school, and I'm very fortunate. I went to the Sunnyside Unified School District, which I'm on the governing board of now. And when I was there, I was very fortunate that we had a career and technical education program that allowed me to train as a certified nursing assistant. I said, I want to be a doctor. I need to get some experience working with patients, because when I apply to med school, I'm going to say, I've worked with patients for this many years, and I want to make sure that you know this. So I trained as a certified nursing assistant, and that wasn't enough for me. I like a challenge. So after I finished my training as a junior in high school, I said, I want something else. There's an organization called HOSA, which is the Health Occupation Students of America, and my teacher said, there's a competition, and you can actually compete at the state and national level, but I think you're too good at the nursing. I think you should try something else. So she ended up giving me a set of needles, a fake arm, and some blood, and said, knock yourself out, teach yourself phlebotomy, and I'll help you along the way. So I started learning not just the nursing assisting, but the phlebotomy, which for those of you that don't know, we're the vampires that work in hospitals and clinics. We're the people that go around with the little tray of needles and draw blood for the different tests. So I ended up training as a phlebotomist, and most of it was done by myself using a book and this fake arm. Then I'm getting ready to graduate high school, and I get offered a position at the Tucson Medical Center, which is the hospital near where I lived. And they said, we generally only take students who are high school as certified nursing assistant because they've gone through a year-long training. But we've heard that you won nationally and at the state level, so we're going to give you a shot to work at our lab here and do some phlebotomy. And I said, sure, that sounds like fun. I said, we're not going to tell people that you've only done this on your own and that you're only going to receive 2 weeks of training before we let you loose on the patients. But we're going to let you do it on your own, and we think you have the capacity to do it. So they ended up having me shadow another phlebotomist for about a week, and then I said, try your first stick on a real human. The first time I ever tried a real stick on a real person, it went well. So they said, keep doing it. I did that for a few months, but at the same time, I was starting to get involved in politics. I was 17. I was Latino. I was living in Arizona. First generation college student. But there was this person who was running for president, and I thought it was so interesting that a woman had the opportunity to be president. And I said, I'd like to be a part of that. So when the primary was happening in 2008 and late 2007, I joined the campaign. I'd never worked in politics. My dad hadn't voted in 30 years. This is not something that was in my blood at all. So I show up. The first time I show up, people are so fascinated by me because I'm this young Latino who is coming out of nowhere and saying, I want to help, I want to be involved, I want to learn about how this process works. They took me under their wing, and I was very fortunate. I had a group of older Jewish women who are called my yentas, who really taught me what it was to be inside politics, what it meant to be going door to door and calling people, but really what it meant to talk to your neighbors and your friends and the people that lived in your community about what were the issues that were important to all of us. So I started getting a little bit more involved. As time progressed, they gave me more responsibilities, and I loved it. I loved the opportunity to talk to people about the issues that they cared about, whether it was healthcare or education, which was always my passion. The campaign starts to wind down. Unfortunately, this person that I worked for did not win. So when she lost, I said, I'm never working in politics ever again. I am so burnt out. I hate this. I understand why people don't want to get involved in politics. I said, I am through with politics. That lasted about 48 hours. I was very fortunate. I was invited to an event that was being held by Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. She was running for re-election, and I knew a little bit about her because she had run previously in Arizona. She was running for her second term in the Congress. But the thing that fascinated me was she was someone who was a fighter. She was someone who was very passionate about the work that she did. She was the youngest woman ever elected to the Arizona State Senate, the first and only Jewish woman elected to the Arizona State Legislature. So she had all these firsts. She was also very young and vibrant and smart. So I would see her on TV. But when I got to this event, I'm fascinated by her energy, her tone, and the way that she really warmed up to people and made them know that she cared about what was important to them. Because her job wasn't just to be your representative, it was to listen and to represent you. So at the end of the event, I actually ended up signing up as an intern after my retirement from politics of 48 hours. I ended up helping on her campaign, but I started spending a little bit more time with her. And the more time I spent with her, the more I learned about what it meant to run for office, what it meant to be involved in public policy. And she would have conversations with me, and she said, what do you want to do with your life? And I would say, I want to be a doctor. My default answer for the last 15 years had always been, be a doctor. She then would say, okay, I understand that you want to be a doctor, but what is your end goal? And I would say, I want to help people. And she said, you should think about other things. Being a doctor is not the only way to help people. And again, being 17 and 18 and naive, I thought, she doesn't know what she's talking about. This is the way that I know how to help people, so I'm going to do it my way. I ended up being very fortunate. Her first campaign that I worked on, she won re-election by over 10 points. It was a great year. 2008 was a great year for her and for a lot of other people running for office. After the election, I kept running into her at events, and even though I had been an intern, she kept giving me a lot of special attention. If there was an event that she'd come to and she wasn't able to see me personally and she was away on the other side of the room, she'd send me an email saying, I hope everything's well, say hello to your mother for me, and we got to grow an interesting friendship. There was an event where I actually had to travel with her, and I spent some time in the car with her. It was on July 4th of 2008, and when we were doing that, she really started talking to me about the way that policies are enacted and the way that people can get involved and make changes in their own community. Having been 17, 18, I really thought that the only way that people made change was by being elected or by paying for those who got elected by giving donations and contribution. I was very cynical about the process, and I thought the only people who are involved in the political process are the politicians and the people who fund them. And she started talking to me about the first time she got involved and why she got involved. It's because she was a small business owner, and she noticed that people wanted to make sure that they had adequate health care for their workers and wanted to make sure that they had adequate education for their employees and their children. So I started learning about more public policy. Started learning that there was these things called lobbyists, and I always thought that they were a dirty word. I always thought that people were lobbyists were people who got paid a lot of money to do bad things. And she started saying, you know, people who are citizens have the ability to lobby their members of Congress, but also at the state level, get involved and change the policies. They tell us what's important to them, and we do what they say because we are their representatives. So it started kind of clicking in my head, and she said, when you're done with this campaign, you should look at getting involved on campus, getting involved in some way, and being involved politically, because it's a good field to be involved. I get to the University of Arizona, I'm 18, and I get involved with an organization called the Arizona Students Association. It is a nonprofit that does higher education advocacy. We advocated for affordable and accessible education for all 150,000 students in the state of Arizona. And I had to tell my parents, you know how I said I wanted to be a doctor? That's kind of starting to go away. I don't really like working with patients as much as I used to. I'm really enjoying talking to people, meeting new people all the time, going to the state legislature and trying to talk to our elected officials about the policies that we needed to make sure that students were getting the best tools that they needed to be able to graduate. My mother, of course, is devastated because my entire life I'd said I was going to be a doctor. My dad didn't care as much, but he said, you know, whatever you do as long as you're happy. So I'm working in politics, starting to get a little bit more involved. At age 18, they give me an assignment, and it's write your first piece of legislation. It's not going to go anywhere. You know, we're in Arizona, you're 18, you're Latino. There's likely no chance that this piece of legislation is ever going to get passed. But they said, just do it well. It'll be a good practice for later on. I end up writing this piece of legislation. I spend months working on it, doing research, calling people all over the country who had worked on similar pieces of legislation. At 19, the new session starts for the legislature, and I talked to a few people that I'd met over the year that I had been lobbying up in Phoenix, and I said, you know, I have this legislation, and I'd be really interested in seeing if we could get any traction on it. And their response was always, you know, it's cute, we can try it, probably not going to go anywhere, because it's not a priority for anybody right now. It was a bill that, for the first time, gives students the legal right on election day to be excused from class for the same amount of time as employees for different businesses. So if you worked at Wendy's, you could have 3 hours off from work on election day to be able to vote. But if you were a student and you were working 9 to 5 and going to classes at the same time, you had no guaranteed right to be able to vote on election day. And it also, for the first time, declared the importance of civic engagement amongst youths, especially those ages 18 to 24. And it actually started requiring early polling locations so that people could vote early. So that way they wouldn't have to use that 3 hours on election day. They could vote beforehand and make sure that they were exercising the right as American citizens. So I start getting more and more involved. The bill kind of dies, and you know, I thought it was a good first try. At least I made an effort. And people would always kind of mock my idealism and say, you know, it's Arizona. This is not a priority. It's about students. This is not something that people are going to care about. But I kept having those meetings. I kept talking to those folks, trying to convince them about the importance of getting more young people involved. Because once we get people who are young involved and get them voting early, they become lifetime voters. They become people who are active in their community for the rest of their lives. So we ended up doing more work, and it was getting close to the end of the session, and we get a phone call. And the bill just got put on the agenda for next week, and it's going to be right before the end of session. So there's a chance that the bill might actually pass. So myself and the other students who were working on this piece of legislation started activating all of our students. We had 1,500 students who called into the office of the state senator who was sponsoring the bill to make sure that they kept it on the list of things that they were going to try and pass. And fortunately, at the age of 19, we were able to pass my first piece of legislation. And afterwards, you know, I got to enjoy having had my first piece of legislation passed, but then I kept thinking, okay, so what's next? This is step number one, but how do we make sure that we implement this, and how do we make sure that we keep getting involved? I worked on it for a year, and we ironed some things out because it involved mandating some things from the state, but also mandating some things to the university, but also the student governments, and making sure that they were accountable to the students that they were working for, to make sure that we were all working as partners to increase the amount of civically engaged students and making sure that they were best informed in a nonpartisan way. 2009 ends. It was a good year. 2010 starts up. It's a very strange year for me. I ended up getting invited to be the campaign manager for someone who was running for State House for re-election named Steve Farley. He was the assistant minority leader running for re-election. He had a very competitive primary, and he didn't know how old I was when he interviewed me. I was hired at the age of 19. I turned 20 on the campaign, and we were successful. His primary was one where after he won, the election was over. He was in such a safe Democratic district that it didn't matter what happened after that, as long as he basically stayed alive until Election Day, he would be fine. So I became an in-kind donation as a staffer to other campaigns. And because of my expertise in communications and my expertise talking to people who were independents and Republicans, I was loaned out to 2 different campaigns. The first was Congresswoman Gifford's 2010 re-election bid, and the other was a campaign for someone who was running for State House for re-election in a really competitive legislative district. So 2010 was a really rough year. I'm sure many of you remember how vitriolic and how toxic the campaigns were in 2010. The people who were running didn't often live up to their calls for civility. Many people would talk out of one side of their mouth and say, you know, the other person needs to be better. We need to talk about the issues. And then 5 minutes later on the other side of their mouth, talk about how the person was a drunk or an alcoholic and had DUIs, and we needed to not vote for them because of that reason. So we were attacking each other. We had a lot of things happen in 2010. We had the healthcare vote, which the Congresswoman voted for, and at the same time, someone shot at the door of her congressional office in Tucson. So we were always on pins and needles. We had an event, a debate actually, where someone showed up with a gun, and in the middle of the debate, the person got up and dropped it. So we didn't really know what the person was planning to do with the gun, but the fact that they came in and would drop the gun was something that was really startling to a lot of us. 2010 starts to wind down. The campaign is getting really close. Congresswoman Giffords is running for her 3rd term in a Republican district that has gotten more Republican since she got reelected the last time. It's not looking good. The polling data is showing that she's not going to make it. There's seats all over the country that Democrats are expected to lose, and she was one of the targeted races since day one of her being elected to the Congress because it was such a Republican district. We had no business having that district, is what the NRCC would say. So as we get to Election Day, we're really tired, we're really tense. We've been working for hours on end. All of the people who are working on the campaign think, you know, it's a losing battle, but we're going to fight it anyway. We know that she's done a good job, and we're going to keep fighting. When we get to Election Day, we have a party generally to celebrate our victories, but this time it was more about mourning our losses. People all around the state of Arizona were losing their seats, and when we talk to each other, we're all distraught. We start seeing the returns. Nothing's really looking good. We lost every single statewide race that we had worked on. The only thing that was really the glimmer of hopes for people who were working on the campaigns was the Congresswoman's race, and it was so tight. As returns started coming in, she'd be up 100, down 400, up 500, down 200. So all night long, the results are coming in, and they're not looking positive. Keeps going back and forth. We think there's going to be a recount. People are starting to talk about the potential lawsuits. But at the end of the night, when everyone's starting to go home, I actually have the opportunity to go and visit the Congresswoman in her private suite. 2008 was a really different year. When she had a suite, there was a party going on. There was a lot of people who were supporters, friends, and donors who were all celebrating what was a double-digit win. This night was really different. When I get in there, it's just her husband, her district director, her chief of staff, and her campaign manager. So I come in and I don't want to intrude. So I just wanted to drop something off that my mom had made for the Congresswoman. She had made a cake. So I wanted to make sure that she at least got her cake, regardless of what happened that night. And when we come in, everyone around her is just kind of distraught. Some people are crying, but everyone's just really tired. And this had taken a lot out of everybody. It had been a very toxic campaign. It was one of the most expensive house races in the country. So then I am getting ready to leave, and I don't think I'm going to say hi to the Congresswoman because she's in the bedroom and I don't want to bother her. But as I'm getting ready to leave, she hears that I'm in the room, and she comes out, and she is exhausted. All of us are. But she comes over and she gives me a hug, and she says, "Thank you so much for coming in." And she says, "You know, it doesn't matter what happens tonight, regardless of whether I win or I lose. It's not about scoring political points. It's not about who's up and who's down. It's about making sure that we have the power to change other people's lives, and that we use that power until the last day that we have it. So this is someone who's about to lose their congressional seat. This is something that people work for their entire lives, and she's on the verge of losing it, and it's not about whether or not she's going to win re-election. It's about what am I going to do until the last day that I have the power to help people, to help them. And I thought that was really refreshing. For someone who was so exhausted, having worked on the campaign for as long as I had, I was ready to call it quits regardless of the results, and that energized me once more. And this was the person that I had always admired. This was the Gabby that I always liked and I always wanted to work for. So after that incident, I ended up going to her office manager, who was still in the party talking to folks, trying to figure out what are we going to do if we lose our jobs. I say, I'd like to intern. And she said, but we don't know if we've won yet. And I said, no, we're going to win tonight because of people like Congresswoman Giffords deserve to be reelected because they're doing it for the right reasons, not because they want to have political power, but because they want to make changes in people's lives. So she says, okay, let's wait until after the results, and then you can come back. So I get invited to her office a few weeks later. She won by less than 1%. She won with 4,000 votes. And this is a district that is a lot older and votes really heavily. So to have won by such a narrow margin was shocking. Arizona's congressional delegation went from being a 5 Democrat, 3 Republican delegation to a 3 Democrat, 5 Republican delegation overnight. When we come back, the year is about ready to end. I see her at a restaurant in Tucson right before I'm supposed to start my internship. It's a few days after Christmas, and she's having dinner with her family. And she comes over and she says, I'm so excited you're going to be interning in my office. I'm glad that you're finally doing it after years of saying you would do it. And I said, I'm really looking forward to it. And I said, do you have anything exciting going on in the Congress? And she said, well, you know, we have a very difficult Congress, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that we do what we can to represent the people from the 8th District. Because I don't care if they're Republicans in charge or if they're Democrats in charge. I want to do my best job for the rest of the people who have elected me. And again, this is the person who kept kind of reinvigorating me every time I was tired. And the dinner ends and I say goodbye. I get a phone call the next morning from her office manager saying, hey, Daniel, as you know, we have a situation where interns leave over winter break. And because you live in Tucson, we'd like to invite you to come in and start a little early. January 12th is the day that I was supposed to start because that was the first day of school at the University of Arizona. But they said, since you live in Tucson, would you be willing to come in a little early? And I said, of course, I love the office and I love all the staff. So January 3rd is my first day. I'm working 8 to 5 every day because I knew that they needed the help, and I absolutely loved being around all of them. And about the 6th, we get a phone call from DC, and it says, the Congresswoman would like to come and do a Congress on Your Corner event. To give a little background on the Congress on Your Corner event, it's an event that she held periodically to talk one-on-one with her constituents. So she didn't just think her job was being in DC, it was about being on the ground in Tucson and talking to the people that had elected her, seeing what was on their mind, what were their priorities. So she's having this event, and she wants us to put it together in 2 days, which is a very big thing to do, to put together an event and to get the sufficient amount of attention to get people there so that it wasn't a wasted trip. So we start putting it together. Gabe Zimmerman, who was her community outreach district director, put it together, and he asked me for help. And he said, you know, I know we've been asking you to work 8 to 5 every day this week, but would you be willing to come in on Saturday? And I said, of course. I wake up on Saturday, January 8th, a little tired. I had just worked a full 40-hour week, and I was still working my retail job because it was a part-time thing in the winter. I needed to earn money because I was a college student. So I was exhausted, but I woke up a little late, and I went to the wrong Safeway. I was supposed to be there at 9. I showed up at about 9:30. I always run late to things, so for me it was fairly typical to run late. So they knew to expect me a little bit later than they normally would. So he had told me to be there at an earlier time than he should have, so that I would be there on time. When I get there, I end up seeing that they've already set up for the majority of the things. And he said, you know, your job today is going to be to check people in. Because what we want to do is make sure that every person who comes in, if they have any potential problem with a federal agency, that as an office, we're doing our best to address those needs. And if we have their contact information, it's easier to do it. And if they don't have any problems, we just want to thank them. Whether or not they agree with the positions of the Congresswoman, we want to thank them for coming out and using their Saturday morning to spend it with her and with us. So we set everything up, and one of the people that was working for her was named Pam Simon. She was a community outreach director, and she was very new. I was very new to the office, so she didn't really know me. She had never worked on the campaign since the original one, so she had no idea who I was. She goes up to Gabe and she says, "Gabe, would you like a cup of coffee?" And he says, "I wouldn't, but did you ask Daniel if he would?" And she says, "Who the hell's Daniel?" So I ended up having Gabe, who mentioned me because he was a social worker at heart, and that's what he had done for the entire time previously to joining her staff. So she got me a cup of coffee, and we got ready. The event was supposed to start at 10 a.m. People are filing in right at 9:45. Everyone wants to be there first to be able to get out of the way because everyone knows that an event with the Congresswoman always leads to a big crowd because everyone gets to talk to her one-on-one, and nobody ever takes the 2 minutes that we give them. Everyone takes between 5 and 10, depending on what they want to talk to her about, because it's an opportunity to meet with your member of Congress, which not very many people have. So it was an important thing for a lot of folks. We have people start filing in. People are very angry for what had happened recently. Some people were upset because of the fact that so many other Democrats had lost their seats, and they wanted to come in and say, we're pulling for you because you're one of the few left. But there was other people who were Republican who were angry because she had voted on the healthcare legislation, or she had voted this way on this piece of legislation. So there was people who were coming across the spectrum who wanted to talk to her. So I'm talking to folks. There was this group that came in, and it had Susie Heilman and a young girl actually named Christina Taylor Green, who was 9 years old. She had recently turned 9. She was working, she was going to school at Mesa Verde Elementary School. She had just been elected to her student council. And this was her first time going to a political event. And her neighbor, Susie Heilman, wanted to bring her in because she wanted to show her that women could be in a position of power, that women could do something positive for their community. So this young girl comes in, and she is 9 years old, and she's very timid at first. And she signs in, and when she's signing in, I actually kind of get on one knee and I give her the clipboard, because I remember when I was younger, being ignored sometimes because I was younger and people not paying that much attention to me, and because I wasn't that far removed from her. I was only 11 years older than she was. I wanted to give her some special attention and make her feel like a grown-up. When I gave her the clipboard, she seemed to grow about 5 inches because she knew that she was being paid attention to, that she was important not just to me but to the Congresswoman because I worked for the Congresswoman. She then asked me, "I don't want to come up with a stupid question. Will you help me with something?" We had pieces of information that we had from the office, so I gave her information that was way over her head. She had no idea what it meant, but she was excited because she was being treated just like everyone else. So I helped her give her a few pieces of information so that she could ask the question that she wanted to ask. And I keep going down the line. People are still coming in, signing people in. About 10 minutes into the event, we hear a gunshot. Someone yells gun, and in Arizona, we had just recently allowed for the first time fireworks to be sold. So for about a split second, I think maybe it's a firework, because there was places that were selling them in parking lots and grocery stores. And the second time I hear the bang, I realize this is not a firework. So I drop what I'm doing. I'm at the end of the line. I'm about 40 feet away from where the Congresswoman is. I drop what I'm doing, and I run to the front of the line to make sure that I had something to do with the people that were at the front of the scene, because I had very limited training. They don't teach you much trauma when you're a certified nursing assistant, and I wanted to make sure that I had the ability and the opportunity to help people. I knew that regardless of what happened to me, I wanted to be helping people, because I probably would get shot if I just stayed there, and at least I would try to do something if I were to be injured. So as I'm running to where the site is, and me and the gunman kind of cross paths. And as we're doing that, I get to the front, and I see that there's several people who had been injured. The first person that I see that was injured was Judge John Roll, who was a federal judge. When I get to him, he doesn't look like he can be helped. Using my very limited training, I see that he had already started to bleed out, and there wasn't too much that you could do with no training, no equipment, and really not the experience to help him. I then keep moving on, and I see who has a pulse, who's still breathing, who can we still help. I check 2 or 3 other people before I get to the Congresswoman. At first, it looked like she was in a defensive position. I wanted to make sure that she was okay. I'm talking to Ron Barber, her district director, who had been shot twice, and I see that he has 2 severe injuries, but they're not life-threatening, at least not right away. And he keeps saying, go to Gabby. Make sure you're checking on Gabby and make sure you're helping others. So I started to see the people that she surrounded herself with were people who were so selfless that even though they had been injured and even though they were bleeding, they wanted us to help others. When I got to the Congresswoman, I realized she hadn't just taken a defensive position. She was actually bleeding from the 1 gunshot wound to her head. So I come in behind her, I check to see if there's any other injuries, and there isn't any. I kneel beside her, and I put my arm up against her to kind of hug her, but then I start using my bare hand to stop the blood loss as much as possible. Again, I didn't have any equipment. I was wearing basically what I'm wearing now, plus a sweater vest. So I didn't have any tools, but I started to think, right now, it doesn't help anyone if I freak out. If I go into shock, I'm not going to be helpful to anybody. The thing that I need to do is remain calm, and I need to make sure that I'm giving her all of the attention that I can because she's alert, she's conscious, and she has a brain injury of this severity. So I start holding on to her head, and I put her head up against my chest to make sure that she doesn't asphyxiate on her own blood. And then I start talking to her because I think one of the things that we often forget about people in a trauma situation is it's a very traumatic thing. It's called trauma for a reason. When we look at them, we're trying to keep them together, we're trying to keep them alive, but we don't often think about the fear and the anxiety that people have when they're in that kind of situation because they may not know what's going on around them. So I wanted to talk to her. She was someone who was always very inquisitive and someone who was always very curious. So I wanted to let her know what had happened. So I started looking around in the scene around me, and I said, people have been injured, the police have been identified, we're going to try and get a hold of your husband, Mark, but you're going to be okay. We're going to get you to the hospital as soon as we can. So I keep holding the pressure, I keep getting her engaged, and I keep asking her questions, and since she cannot talk, but she's trying to communicate, I ask her to squeeze my hand if the answer is yes. And I say, do you understand that there's been a shooting and you've been injured? She would squeeze my hand. I would ask her, do you understand that we're going to try and get a hold of your husband, Mark, and that we're going to take you to the hospital? She would squeeze it again. And then at the mention of her husband, Mark, she would squeeze even tighter. The emergency medical services were about 100 feet away, but because in a trauma situation like this, they want to make sure that they limit the amount of victims. They don't know who are the victims and who are the assailants. They didn't want to just let the paramedics come in. So for a few minutes, we could see them. We could hear them. They could see us, but they couldn't come over to us because they didn't want to get an added body to the body count. So it's the most frustrating thing, and it felt like an eternity to have people who could help feet away, but because they didn't want to add to the level of pain and to the level of destruction, they couldn't come across the yellow line. We ended up waiting a few more minutes. They finally come over, and when they come over, they are in shock, just like everyone else. They are used to being in trauma situations, but they're not used to seeing 19 people who had been injured. They're not used to seeing someone who's a member of Congress and a friend of many in the community be someone who's injured. So they come in and they start trying to assess what's going on. While they're doing this, the people from inside the Safeway start coming out and saying, what can we do to help? They say, what can we do to make sure that we help as many people as possible? Since I had my bare hand, I asked for some clean linens or some clean cloth because I had been shaking hands. I didn't know what I had touched, and I didn't want to give her an infection of some kind because I didn't have clean hands. So they end up coming and bringing out smocks from the meat department that were clean, and we end up using that to apply pressure to not just her wounds, but the wounds of others. When we did that, I also asked them to cover up the bodies of those who had passed away, because in this age, people have smartphones, iPhones, Blackberries, and started taking pictures almost immediately. And the last thing that I wanted for someone to deal with after their family member had died was pictures of their family member in such a vulnerable situation. So that's actually one of the reasons why she was originally reported as dead, because I had covered her up to make sure that no one would walk by with a camera phone and take pictures of her in such a vulnerable state. The paramedics asked me to help. They say, will you try and keep her calm? They didn't give her any pain medication because they couldn't. They didn't know what her vitals were. They didn't know if she was allergic to anything. They didn't want to make it worse. So it was my job then to take care of her emotional needs like I had been for the minutes before. So I keep talking to her. When we get in the ambulance, I tell her, we're going to talk to Mark. We're going to make sure that he comes in. And he's living in Houston, but we're going to talk to your parents and have them come in from Tucson. As we're in the ambulance, I pull out my phone and I make 2 phone calls. The first was to my parents, and I say, we're on our way to the hospital. Congresswoman Giffords has been shot. I'm not injured. I'll see you later. The next was a phone call to Steve Farley, whose campaign I had run. I had a new cell phone, so I didn't really have all the numbers that I would normally have. So I said, I need you to stop talking. Here's what's happened. We're going to UMC right now. I need you to get a hold of these people. I need you to get a hold of Mark and of Gloria and Spencer, her parents. We get to the hospital, and when we get to the hospital, we get separated. She gets taken into the emergency room, and I get sequestered, and they take away my cell phone because they want to question me to make sure that all of the things that I had seen were things that I was able to report to the police when they're doing their investigation. When I'm getting ready to go into the room before they allow me to be interviewed, the last thing that I hear is that the Congresswoman has passed away, that she had died. And they don't give me any information for hours. About 8 hours later, when I finally get interviewed by the police department and the sheriff's department, I find out that she hadn't died. But for that 8 hours, I was in a very distraught state because after all the things that I had done, all the things that other people had done around me, it seemed like all the work had been for naught. So we were very lucky that we were able to get her into the emergency medical center within 45 minutes, and it probably saved her life. A few days later, we were very honored to have the President of the United States come to the University of Arizona. We were having a memorial for all of the people who passed away. But the main thing that we were doing was celebrating the life of those who had passed away, because all of the people who had passed away, from Dorwin Stoddard to Christina Taylor Greene, had done things to contribute to their community. So that was the big emphasis of the talk that the president and I had the unique honor of being able to speak before the president did in front of 27,000 people. So for me, it was a great opportunity, but it was one that was really bittersweet. So at that moment, a lot of us who were involved on the 8th decided we need to do things. We need to make sure we prevent this from happening again. We need to make sure that what we do now is something that ensures that nothing like this ever happens again. We need to make sure that we work as a community. So we started talking about things like mental health, because that was one of the things that had happened in our situation where Jared Loeffner, the young man who had shot the Congresswoman, had not received the adequate mental health that he needed. We started talking about other policies that we wanted to see enacted to prevent tragedies from like this from happening again. But one of the things that I started to do was I started to think of, how am I going to translate this sudden attention into a positive thing? And that's kind of where it leads me to today. And again, I'm really excited to be here because I get to share some of the things that I've learned. And being a wise 22-year-old, I have a lot to share. I think there's 5 things that I've really learned as a result of this incident, and really a lifetime of wanting to help people. The first lesson, I think, is the importance of kindness. I think oftentimes we forget that kindness is not something that is a random act. We say that it's a random act, but it's something that we need to work towards. To be kind does not mean to be a pushover. It doesn't mean that you're going to let people walk all over you. It just means that we need to be conscious and alert of the actions that we take and the things that we say and how they might affect other people. Because I think one of the things that we always forget is we are all in this together. We are all one community, whether it's Ohio or Arizona. We are all in this together, and the only way to make things better is if we're all working cooperatively. And we may disagree on policy, we may disagree on politics, but we can all agree that we want to make America a better place. The second thing that I think is important is the importance of civility. It's something that's often talked about but not practiced enough. Politicians say it all the time, but they never do it because it's not effective. Because we as citizens have allowed politics to degrade to the point where negative ads are the most effective. So what we need to do as citizens is encourage our politicians and demand it from them that we will not accept people who campaign in this way. We will not accept people who govern in this way. Because at the end of the day, it's about solutions for everybody, not just solutions for Democrats or solutions for Republicans. So civility is important, but it's something that we need to practice ourselves. Like I mentioned earlier, we can't say one thing and then say another 5 minutes later when we're talking to a different group. We need to do it ourselves, and it's something that takes a lot of work. It's really easy to get angry at people and say, you know, that darn blank, 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 and to talk about people in a way that disparages them. But it's really difficult to try and build each other up as a society. The next was the importance of education. I think one of the things that I've learned that is really important is education is a lifelong process. Education never stops. And everything that we learn might come up one day in the future to help us. Since we don't know what we will be, where we will be in 5 years, or what situations we'll be put in, all of the training, all of the knowledge that we gain through our lives is important, because at the end of the day, the training that I received in high school that I thought I'd never use again because I was working in politics ended up helping me save the life of someone else. The next is one that I think is really important, and that's especially important for young people, is the importance of humility. I think when I started working in politics, I started getting a big head. I started letting the attention get to my head. And when I started getting a lot of this recognition, it's really easy to say, okay, I accept that title of hero, or, I enjoy being the only young person, and because I'm the only young person, I'm going to let everyone compliment me, and I'm going to let it get to my head. Golda Meir, the former prime minister of Israel, once said, "Don't be so humble, you're not that great." And I think that's a lesson that we can all take and use, because it doesn't matter whether you're the president of the United States or someone flipping burgers at McDonald's. We are all human, and we are all in it together, and we need to make sure that no matter what we do, we are doing things to help ourselves, but at the community at large. So humility is extremely important. And then the last one is the importance of service. I think oftentimes people, especially young people and groups that are marginalized, whether it's women or people who are LGBT or minority or disabled, think, I don't have anything to contribute. And I think people often say, well, that's not enough, so I'm not going to do anything. And when we have people who say, I'm not going to do anything because I don't think I can contribute enough, we end up being in the situation where we are now, where there's not enough people contributing. There's not enough people trying to change their communities. I think all of us can find little ways in which we can give back to our communities. Finding something that drives you, something that you're passionate about. For some people, it's putting quilts together for the homeless in their church. For others, it's running for office. For some people, it's being an educator. But finding that thing that you're passionate about that will help improve your community that you live in. And I think that's really the most important lesson that we can take away from the 8th and from all of the work that I've done. Because at the end of the day, we're all in it together. And if we're not all trying to make it better, then it's going to stay the same way that it has been for years, and it'll probably deteriorate. So I know that we have a few questions, a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to let Tony kind of moderate the way that we're going to do that, but I'd love to talk to you guys and hear from you what questions you might have.
If you have a question, just please step up to a mic.
Hello. I know I had lunch with you today, but I have another question for you.
Yes.
I know you spoke about kindness. Mm-hmm. How would you practice and let alone teach kindness to someone who degrades you or brings you down or doesn't even want to learn it?
I think that's a really important question, especially right now I'm on a school board in Tucson, Arizona, and it's something that we deal with all the time because of high rates of bullying. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about is when we have people who are bullies or people who are not being kind, we need to really address what the core issues are. I think a lot of times what we've seen, especially in education, is people who are bullying are not doing it just for the sake of being malicious. They're doing it because there's something else that's going on in their lives that they need help with. Whether that's they are in a single parent home and they don't receive any kind of attention from that parent because they're working so hard to keep food on the table, or whether it's they've had emotional problems and they never receive the mental health that they need. We really need to look at what the core of the issues are, and we can't just take things for face value. We can't just say they're mean because they're a mean-spirited person. I truly believe 90% of the people on this planet are good. There's going to be that percentage that aren't, but for the most part, if we can give people the tools that they need to be the best them that they can be, they are likely not going to be the bullies that they were before. So we need to find out what the core issues are. And sometimes it's not up to us. Something that needs to happen is not going to happen because we want it to happen. We need to wait for them to find it themselves. Because if people don't want help, they're not going to be open to receiving it. So we need to make sure that they know that whenever they're ready to take part and be a productive member, that we're there for them, but we're not going to push them because we don't want to aggravate the situation. Any more questions? Yes. We have mics in the middle, so if some of you didn't see them before.
Thanks for being who you are. And with all the money in politics now, and I know there's no easy answer, but with that Supreme Court decision that allowed for these unlimited contributions to super PACs, and do you have anything how do you not become cynical?
I think it's really easy to let the money in politics be a driver that turns you to cynicism. And it's really hard not to be cynical, especially when I'm working in politics for as long as I have. But I think it's important that we as citizens at every single level, whether it's school board or homeowners association, understand that we need to show the civility that we expect from our politicians. And if we change the conversation and we say, we want to talk about the issues, we don't want to talk about whether or not this person did this or that. We want to talk about the important issues and the solutions that you're proposing for us as Americans. We will start to change the conversation. But it's something that takes a long time. It's taken decades to get to where we are now. It's not going to be fixed overnight. It's not flipping a switch. It's about working together and taking the time out and understanding that it's not going to happen quickly. It might not be this generation that gets it back to the level where we're having civil discourse. Barry Goldwater, who was a Republican senator from Arizona, once said, "We can disagree without being disagreeable." And we need to get back to that. That was 50 years ago. So we know it's happened in our lifetime. So we need to work towards that. But the way that we do that is not by expecting things to happen overnight. It's by demanding that the change happen and make sure that we are there and keeping track of those who make promises. Because when they don't fulfill their promises, we can't forgive them and say, well, we understand that you had to stop being civil for that campaign because it was a really tough one. We need to demand it every single time and expect it of all politicians, regardless of party or affiliation, because it's not something that's a problem for just people involved in politics. It's an American problem when we can't have civil discourse and we have the kind of gridlock that we have in the Congress because people aren't willing to work with each other because they know that if they work with someone of the opposite party, their party is going to find someone to run against them in the primary, and we're going to be back where we were 6 months ago. Yes?
First of all, I applaud that answer. That was a great answer. What do you think? I do. Fantastic. Okay, here's my question. You're all of what, 21 yet?
22.
22. You're 22. Yeah. You've given us some glimpses into who you are, but I want to know more about who you are. How did you become so wise in that 22-year-old? I want to know more about you.
That is a very difficult question. I think it stems from being an old soul. I think for me, it's always been important to be involved in my community. I think my parents imparted upon both myself and my sisters the importance of being an active member of your community, and I think that's one of the most important things. We cannot stay on the sidelines, especially groups that are marginalized, whether it's for being young or being a woman or being a minority. We need to make sure that we are active participants in the things that are happening in our community, because when we are not, people who don't represent us and don't represent our values and our interests are going to be making decisions for us because we aren't speaking up, we're not being involved. And that's why we need to step up, and whether that's writing a letter, running for office, or working on campaigns, we need to make sure that we're active. So that passion for being active from a young age has been something that's really driven me. And now I'm continuing my public service, or starting my public service. I hope I didn't peak at 21. I'm starting to continue the work in education that I started when I was working on higher ed issues by being on a school board and hoping that the 19,000 students that are under my care with the 5 other board members is something positive, that we can increase our graduation rates. A 67% graduation rate for high school is unacceptable. And we need to change it, and we need to change the mentality that education is something that just happens for people, that it's something that can be taken for granted, because we need to make sure that education is not just a priority, but a right for all students. And not just a high school education, but a college education, changing that mentality so that we get people P through 20, preschool through graduate school. Because as the economy has changed, you all know it here in Ohio, when the jobs for manufacturing went away, what is the likelihood of those jobs coming back unless we train people in the new fields that will be tomorrow's fields and tomorrow's jobs? Jobs are being shipped overseas, and we need to make sure that we prevent that from happening by creating jobs that will be based here in places like Ohio and places like Arizona. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I know it kind of went all around, but yes.
Hi, Daniel. Just wanted to say thank you, and I'm so glad you came. I wanted to know what Daniel has in store for life in the next 10 years.
I'm trying to get through the next 2. I was elected to governing board, and I'm fulfilling my commitment. When I ran, I said, no matter what happens, I am making a commitment that I'm going to serve my full term So I'm in Tucson for the next 3 years. That's about as much as I know. I'm hoping that the election, the person that I'm working for wins, and I'd like to work in his office to make sure that I'm a community advocate and working to make sure that the issues for people from Southern Arizona, from Arizona, are being represented in the Congress and in the Senate. But, I'm 22. I really don't know. I'm in the same place a lot of 22-year-olds are in their life, where I don't know what's next. I'm hoping that grad school is at some point in my future, but at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get through the next 6 months and the next 3 years, because that's where I am concerned with. I know that there's a lot of work to be done, and my state needs me. I don't want to be one of those people that leaves and takes a job offer in DC or LA or New York just because it seemed like a good offer at the time. I want to make sure that I stay in my community to change things, because if I'm not going to do it, there's very few others who will. And I don't want to be one of those people who regrets having left my community and see it continue to crumble when I know that I could have taken a part in helping create some positive changes. Spencer.
Yes, Daniel. Well, last night we were talking, and you had mentioned all the different ways that you can give back to the community, and I couldn't help but pick up when you said you were a kid, or even when you were still in high school, I think, and you were thinking, even for that 48 hours, politics is this dirty slump. I don't want to get involved with that. And I'm wondering, I know people that still think that. I know people who are advanced in age and still think that. And I'm wondering what your ideas for how they can give back to their communities and how they can also kind of embrace the Congresswoman's message of just doing whatever you can, whatever power you have to change lives. So what can someone who has no interest in politics or doesn't really want to engage in that world, what can they do to change lives and alter communities?
Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not just about politics as a way to give public service. I think anyone who has a passion can really find a way to use that to help other people. One of the people who was killed on January the 8th, Phyllis Schneck, she was in her 70s. Her passion was her church. And for her, every week she would go in and she would put quilts together that made sure that people who were homeless had a way to stay warm in the evenings. There's people who work at homeless shelters. It's about finding something, even small, that you can contribute on a weekly or monthly basis. And for me, for the longest time, it meant I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be a nurse. But now it means I want to be someone who helps give a voice to the people who can't speak up for themselves because they don't think that they can, or they don't have the ability to because they're working 9-to-5 jobs, going to school full-time, and they have children that they need to take care of. It's about making sure that I'm doing my best. But for others, it's about finding those things that drive you. For some people, that is being in music and creating music that helps build a sense of community. For others, it's being a teacher. I think one of the things that we often forget is the importance of teachers, and that's why I am so passionate about being on the school board, because I understand that I didn't get here just because I'm the great Daniel Hernandez. I got here because I had teachers all throughout my life, both the teachers in my schools and the people who taught me things and life lessons outside of school. So I think we need to look at everyone as a potential teacher and someone who can contribute to the fabric of our lives, because you'd be surprised how people who you may not necessarily be that impressed with on the face value could actually have a rich story and a rich history that they can share with you and help influence you as you move on. So, it's kind of a cop-out answer to say, find what you're passionate about. But I think until you find what you're passionate about, you shouldn't just do things for the sake of doing them. You need to find out what that passion is, and it's never too late. I've met people who are in their 60s and 70s who say, I never thought I could do anything to help my community. But now once a week, I help someone who's never had the ability to read. I teach them how to read, or I read books to the blind, or I do things that make me feel good because I know that it's helping other people in my community. So it's never too late to start, and it's never too late to start, and it's never too early to start. So letting kids know, especially those of us who have kids, that being a part of your community, volunteering with different nonprofits and different organizations is important, because at the end of the day, it makes not you just feel better, but it helps people who are receiving the benefits from that organization. So thank you. Any more questions? No? Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight.
As Daniel's participation here, he was able to secure $2,500 that will go to the LULAC Scholarship Fund, and also $2,500 as well that will go to Rainbow Alliance. Okay, thank you. Also, like to announce, on the 17th of May at the Nutter Center, we will have the Dayton Hispanic Chamber will have their business expo on the floor of the Nutter Center. So please come out and visit the different businesses, taste the different foods from the different restaurants in the area. And also on the 19th of May, we will have the LULAC State Conference here where we will be awarding $15,000 in scholarships from local contributions, and also awarding many members that have been contributing to our mission as an organization and also as a university. We have several members from the community that have stepped up, okay, and have gotten involved and made a difference. I invite you to come out and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.